Good morning, everyone. Hello, muito bom dia from California, and good afternoon to our folks in the East Coast that always follow the projects that PBBI puts together. This one is a different project. It is the 47th annual conference of the Luso American Education Foundation. This is our actually last panel. We have one more presentation at noon, and then our closing events at 1 o'clock. We began, of course, the online sessions on Wednesday, and since then we're going on our, I believe, 19th hour total. So lots of different things that are all being recorded, as all of you know, and will be part of our Portuguese American Oral History Project at Fresno State, at our library, at the digital collections, and also through PBBI Fresno State YouTube channel. Welcome to these panelists. Welcome to everyone that's joining us again, whether you're doing it on social media or through any of the other groups that have agreed to carry it on live as well, or you're going to be watching it later on YouTube as well, or even on social media. Our theme here is quite simple. This panel is called My Take on the Portuguese American Community. And so I'm going to take just a couple of minutes and ask each and every one of you to, first and foremost, take about 2 minutes or so, introduce yourselves, and tell us a little bit about your Portuguese American background and your Portuguese American connection. And so there are indeed 5 of us here, with myself 6, 5 panelists. We have a dynamic duo there together, which is JD Valadão, John, and Justin. So I'll start with Justin. If you'll do that, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your connection to the Portuguese American world and your involvement, if any.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Justin Duquant, and I'm from Tulare, California. I'm a current student at Fresno State. It's my last semester here, and I've grown up in the Portuguese community doing all kinds of various things, with it being helping out for all the festas in Tulare, playing in the Portuguese band, performing Canto, doing the marches, participating in the Portuguese classes and the communities in Tulare as well. And I've just been connected my entire life, trying to help and keep this culture growing and try to have more people my age be involved within the culture as well.
Fantastic. And since we have both of you there, John, JD?
Yeah, my name's JD Valadão. From Tulare, California as well. And like Justin, I've grown up in the Portuguese culture my whole life, involved in it a lot, playing the Portuguese band with him, perform with Grupo Canto, Sorina Tulad, also a group in the folklore group back home in Tulare. And we're also a part of Luso American as well. Our goal just our whole lives has been to keep the cultures going. We know it's kind of a struggle as time goes on with people aging out and the new generation coming in. We want to keep these things going. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
And how far are you at Fresno State, JD?
I'm a 4th year here at Fresno State. I have the remainder of this fall semester, and then I have next spring semester. And then after that, I'm going to be going into the credential program.
Fantastic. Carol, thank you so much for joining us kind of last minute. We appreciate it. Your story.
Yes, my name is Carol Gregory, and I live in the Sacramento area. And my story is I'm a 4th generation Portuguese American. I didn't grow up in the Portuguese culture or community, even though I lived nearby, but I didn't grow up going to festas or being involved in Portuguese events. I didn't become involved in the Portuguese community until I was working on my master's thesis in graduate school at University of California, Davis, when I started to learn about the history of the Portuguese community in a community in Sacramento. And then that's when I started becoming more involved in Portuguese culture and heritage, and going to festas. And then eventually I worked on my PhD dissertation at UC Davis as well, on the Portuguese cultural landscape in California, and looked at the geography of Portuguese communities throughout California. I've been involved in the Portuguese community since that time. I'm board director for the Portuguese Historical and Culture Society, and still active in Sacramento's Portuguese community. But it's been a learning experience for me, because obviously I didn't grow up in the culture initially.
But you learned it well, and you have a fabulous dissertation and thesis. Brad.
I'm Brad Angeja. I was more or less born into Luso. My dad sold insurance back in the day, and my mom was secretary for the Education Foundation. We lived in Oakland when I was younger, and so a lot of the activities were really at my doorstep. And then we moved to Mill Valley, and my wife and I live in San Francisco now. So crossing a bridge is often an obstacle to being in person. As I got older, I've actually been more, I feel like, more in touch with Portuguese heritage. I married into a more Portuguese family than my own. Eduardo Ezebu is my father-in-law. Michaela is my mother-in-law, and he's quite active, of course. And then also, I think, COVID was a crisis and an opportunity. And I have enjoyed forums like this where we've been able to connect, despite how hard it is sometimes to drive to an activity. This has been a good way to connect.
And
That's-
professionally, tell us a little bit about, because we don't have too many of your professions in the Portuguese American community, but
I'm a cardiologist. I practice in Burlingame. My wife's obstetrician in South San Francisco. So that took a lot of time for a few decades of training, which also made it hard to participate. But it's nice to be reconnecting, and we have two teenage children, and we travel to Portugal a fair amount. So it's good to still be connected.
Indeed, thank you, Brad, and my good friend Danielle Mello.
Good morning, everyone. And again, Denise, thank you. I just want to say thank you because I know how much you work, not only at Fresno State, but doing all these other side hustles that you do, and you do so much for the community. So thank you again for helping us all out here. But my name is Daniel Mello, and I was born and raised in Chino, California, just outside Los Angeles. And at about the age of 23, I moved up here to the Central Valley, and I attended Fresno State. The whole family moved up to the valley because they were in agriculture, in the dairy business. And so initially I thought, I like the big city. I don't want to move to the valley. But my mom and dad were like, no, just transfer to Fresno State so you can live with us, save some money, and finish at Fresno State. And so I did. And I met my wife, who's Portuguese as well, and I've been living here since. And I teach here, just outside of Fresno, in a small community called Kerman. I teach high school, and I love it. And I have two kids, and I have to admit that in the past 10 years, let's see what happened in the past 10 years. I had two kids. I got my first full-time job. So I haven't been as active in the Portuguese community as I was before. Growing up in Chino, there is a Portuguese community that's still pretty strong. I was just there in Chino a couple weeks ago, visiting friends. And when I was younger, it wasn't something that I wanted to do. It was more of something that I was kind of forced to do by my parents, right? If that makes sense. And I wanted to go just to talk to my friends, but not necessarily to participate and learn. And it's not until I got older, especially as a late teen, college student, and especially as a parent, that I really saw the interest. I saw the importance of integrating deeper into the Portuguese community. And so that's what I've done, not necessarily with festas and other things like that, but more on the education side. And so whenever I am asked to help, and if I have the time, I do help. So I've helped out with various things with Fresno State and Denise, and I've helped out with initially with YPA, Young Portuguese Americans. Oh wow, that was maybe 8 years ago, right? And that was very fun for a few years. I've helped out with Portuguese American Heritage Publications, California, and that was very interesting and informative. I learned a lot there just in the short amount of time that I was helping out there, and various other activities. So something very, very important, and it's something that you oftentimes don't realize until you get older and you have your own kids, and then you see the perspective that your parents had, and then you realize, oh wow. But I guess it's not just with your Portuguese roots or your ethnic background, but that's with a lot of things, right? So that's my story.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your help as well, and thank you for your commitment. And you did a wonderful job with the California Portuguese heritage. And also, Carol was involved in the heritage publications as well. And we want you to be more involved in Bruma publications. But just real quick, a couple of things. Let's I'm going to combine the next two questions that, of course, I sent to some of you, which was the idea of what are some of the challenges in the Portuguese American community. I think we kind of all know what they are, but maybe some people don't. But what are some of the challenges that you see? But at the same time, how can we make these challenges an opportunity? Because that's what basically we need to do. We need to take these challenges and make them, opportunities for our community. And I'll start with Brad this time, not to start with the same folks. So what are some of the challenges? Like you said, you've been out for a while where you were doing, of course, your studies and, getting, your practices and everything set up. And you're involved now heavily with the Luso American Education Foundation. But what are some of the challenges that you see, that you hear from the Portuguese American community, and some opportunities as these challenges can pose for the future?
Well, the struggle on a personal level, the struggle has been, as I've wanted like Daniel to have the children involved, is that nothing's close by to me. When I wanted the kids to dance in Luso Youth, really the only way to do it was to drive several hours if we wanted to go out to the Contra Costa group, which is what Aaliyah danced in when she was a kid. That was untenable. Mountain View is really the closest. And for a couple of years, we tried it, and it was just so hard to drive down, 101 in bad traffic. And so there's just nothing in San Francisco. And so the challenge that I have is trying to make it real, the involvement for the kids. And that's been a struggle. So we're just not near one of the pockets of local activity. And then the other thing is, it's not that there aren't people of Portuguese heritage in San Francisco, but one of the successes of our ancestors is that they did integrate well, and they did have the next generation succeed. And people here I am, a doctor, and I'm pretty busy, and kids are in San Francisco, and we're at their high school, they're involved in activities. And so there's so much other stuff that is part of the success of being the American part of Portuguese American, that it doesn't leave a lot of time left for the Portuguese part unless it's really at your doorstep, and it's just not on our doorstep. So I think for me, that's been the biggest challenge on a personal level. The opportunity is social media, and there's so much out there, which is great. I think the challenge that from the board, Luso Education board side of it, to try to come up with content that engages the young people when there's so much competing content out there has been difficult to achieve. I think it is a valuable tool. I certainly have not figured out how to use it, because it's hard to get people to sign on to just one more Zoom event as well. So that's a long answer. I see a lot of challenges and haven't been able to use the opportunities.
Okay, let's go over to Justin. Justin, what are some of the challenges that you, as a upcoming graduate in a few months, in a semester from Fresno State, what are some of the challenges? You have the opposite of Brad, which is that you're in Fresno is not a big Portuguese hub, but there is a community, but you're 45 minutes away from where you were born and raised. And there's a strong presence at the popular level. But what are some of the challenges and opportunities you see, not just for you, but also for your generation? Because yesterday someone mentioned, and I want to get both of you, because you're obviously the same kind of, almost the same age, which is they said someone a little bit older than you, but very involved in the community, and their thought is, my gosh, the only problem is I do see young people like me, and this person was like 31, 32, so a bit older than you guys, a decade older, but they said, but it's just, we're in everything. We're the ones that are doing folklore. We're the ones that are doing danza. We're the ones that are doing this. We're the ones that are doing that. It's, and there's more than 25 of us in the community. So what do we do? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see to get more young people such as yourselves involved?
Yeah, that is a tough one. But from what the person yesterday had said, it is for like me and JD, we do every single thing. We do Gundaval, we participate in the band, we're doing Luso, and we're just trying to stay involved as possible. But probably the best thing is just there's a lot of people that were in high school and they would kind of come just to hang out and like see what was going on, but then they move away or they just kind of stop moving, going to these events. And what we could do is just possibly just our generation ourselves just kind of connect more with those people that used to come and try to get them to come, or even have more reasons to come out to the festival. And one thing that I have seen working in Tulare is sometimes having all these events coming out, such as for Festa Espírito Santo as example, there's something going on every day of the week where it brings on a different part of the community that maybe some people are just doing that, but at least come out and they see what else is going on. Like my aunt, she runs the Masters in Tulare, and she has a lot of people that have she's been able to bring in back to the Portuguese community that haven't been coming around as much. But since they did the Masters, they kind of saw what's been going on with the festivals and how everyone's doing, and they've been coming around more often. And that's just one night, and then you have the folklore group coming a different night, and you just have all these different parts of the society coming that maybe there's are a couple of those people that are just doing that, and then they come and see everyone and hang out. And then on the weekends, they even have just even the themed events where it's just the actual festa, and then they have the themed events afterwards that kind of cater towards these younger crowds. You see a lot of these younger people, not even people just from the Tulare areas. We have some friends that are coming up from Manteca, Escalon, and other regions such as that. They're coming down to Tulare just to see what the festivals are like and what's going down down south from them. And those things have really been attributing to more people coming back to the festivals ever since the pandemic, and things have gotten a lot bigger, and hopefully things keep going with things like that. Some things that are a little scary are Carnival, for instance. There's less and less people sitting in those seats to see people perform, and it's that one is probably more just because of the language barrier. There's a lot of people my age that aren't learning the language as fluently as it used to be, and obviously Carnival is all in Portuguese, so if they're sitting there for hours upon hours not understanding what's going on there, then that's a major issue. So hopefully if we can try to get more of a touch with these younger generation, trying to get them to learn the language, it could get them to appreciate Carnival more often, and be able to go to more events which are more deeper in our roots, I'd probably say.
Or do Carnival in English. It can be done.
I'm not sure about that one, because that once you lose the language, you lose a lot of that culture and
but for example, your dad has told me, Justin, that sometimes, and Tony Nunes the same way, that sometimes the younger people that are involved don't understand the things that are going on. I mean, they have to explain to them, well, this is why it's funny because of this. So it's just like, why are people in the masters? Most of the people that I'm sure Stephanie has in the masters don't speak Portuguese any longer. I know them, they don't. But it's fun. It's and there's not. It's just rhyming can happen in any language. It can be done in actually, if John Martins, who I think all of you know, one way or another, passed away not too long ago. If John Martins, that was one of John's projects, was maybe to do a bilingual one and to see how it went. Sometimes it has to start just because if someone in a Spanish island such as the Canary Islands started to doing the tradition of Carnaval Interceda in Spanish, it would have taken off. It would have been also a Spanish deal. So I don't know if we can, unfortunately, because of the way the situation is, I don't know if we can have that ultimate goal, which I share with you, Justin, which would be having everybody that's a son or daughter of a Portuguese, or a grandson or a granddaughter of a Portuguese, learn Portuguese. But the majority of them, and you saw them in high school, years ago and still today, the majority of them do not speak it or understand, but not enough to go out there and act in Carnaval, obviously. JD, your thoughts on how do we get these young people involved is about the same as Justin, or do you have any other ideas as well?
Yeah. So I'm gonna go off of what Justin said a little bit about the younger generation coming out, and then I think Daniel earlier you said how when you were younger, your parents kind of like you felt a little bit forced to do traditions, if I'm not mistaken. So connecting those two, Justin and I earlier this year were able to help the Luso American Youth Council for Tips and Tulare put on a skit, and it mainly talked about keeping the traditions alive and then also speaking more Portuguese at home. I think that's the biggest thing we have to look at. When I was growing up, my grandparents would speak Portuguese to me at home. If you start there, it just continues to grow, and then the love for the culture continues as well. And I think a lot of kids today, in today's day and age, yes, like you said, Denise, want to continue these traditions, but they don't know what's going on. As long as we get them involved and keep explaining what's happening, they'll want to learn more. And I know that because that's what I did. That's what I'm going through right now. Every single day, I'm learning new things about the culture, and every day I'm surprised by it. So it's getting the kids involved and having them speak Portuguese as soon as they can. That's the number one thing. For example, we had a little girl this year in our youth council. Beginning of the year, she asked for lines, and her mom said, let's give her lines in English. I'm like, hey, if she can't speak Portuguese, she won't speak Portuguese, we'll give her lines in English. By the end of that convention, she comes running up to us and says, gee, Justin, next year when we do this, I want lines in Portuguese. I want lines in Portuguese. So that right there just told us right away, like, yeah, like we can have hope in this next generation, not just in Tulare, but in all places in California. If you have
one big difference between learning a line and knowing how to communicate.
Yeah, there is a big difference, but as long as they're trying to speak it, there's people out there that don't even put in the effort to learn. And if you don't put in the effort to learn, then that's how these traditions are going to die off. And we don't have the same amount of people from my dad's generation and before that coming from the islands or coming from continents over to the United States anymore. It's slowly starting to, it's going down. The less people we have come over here, the quicker our traditions are going to die. And that's why it's up to people like me and Justin, our age, and then even the generations after that to continue these. It's a lot of pressure, but that's the biggest challenge. And like I said earlier, speaking Portuguese, that's the number one thing. You get that started, and it's a continuous train on from there. So yeah.
Well, I agree. And as a Portuguese teacher, I would want everybody to speak Portuguese, but the issue is we only have 12 schools in California. Yeah. So, and the census just told us that 350,000 people of Portuguese ancestry, and only 10% still speak some Portuguese. And so, like Carol, for example, she speaks a little bit, but it'd be tough for her to teach Portuguese to your child if you don't know the language. So I think we also have to be inventive. And Carol, I'll pass it on to you because it kind of tacks on to the situation of what Brad has been working diligently at Luso American Education Foundation, which is, some grants for some projects and students. And I thought it was kind of interesting, Brad, that I know the story, but that Carol just mentioned that she got connected with her roots when she was doing a master's project. So it kind of, we have been talking about in the foundation. So even though you can't speak the language, how much do you feel that knowing a lot of the culture has helped you connect with your roots? And how can people connect with their roots if they don't have the opportunity, unfortunately, to speak it? And your thoughts on that, Carol?
Yes. I think it just helps to have just basic knowledge of the Portuguese culture. I mean, going to the festas has helped me learn more about it. Also, I'm only half Portuguese and I didn't grow up Catholic. So that's kind of been a challenge as well. Because a lot of the events in the Portuguese community are based on the Catholic religion. And if you didn't grow up being Catholic, that's kind of challenging as well. I mean, again, going to the events has helped me learn more about my Portuguese heritage and culture, and then doing genealogy as well, because I didn't know a lot about my family history. And then when I started doing genealogy and doing a DNA test, I connected with cousins I didn't even know I had that were more connected with the Portuguese culture. And so that kind of helped me as well. Again, being third, fourth generation, I think the other panelists are more of earlier generations. I'm third, fourth generation actually. So I'm more of a different challenge. Again, I took Portuguese language classes in college, but my family didn't speak Portuguese. My job, people don't speak Portuguese there. I'm an American basically, and I grew up as American. It's just hard to speak, Portuguese unless you go to these events or Portuguese people. And so I'm kind of limited in that aspect where I haven't kept up with the Portuguese language. And my son now, he's only a quarter Portuguese, so he doesn't know any Portuguese at all as well, but he does go to the Portuguese events with me and so forth. One other thing I did want to bring up, which you talked about yesterday, when you talked to the person from Pismo Beach, and they're having the big Portuguese event in Pismo Beach. Really, I think there's a lot of Portuguese American people of Portuguese descent out there who are like me, third, fourth generations, who again, just are not involved in Portuguese heritage and culture. And I think having more Portuguese events being mainstream and advertised as mainstream, like they're doing in Pismo Beach, I think and then bringing in people that just aren't connected with their culture, like me. I think I know a lot of the festivals in the Central Valley, especially, aren't advertised and so forth. And it's a very close-knit tight community, and that is to help keep the culture and the community authenticated. But again, also to grow and to change as generations get older, you just need to be more mainstream and advertise more to bring in people into the community.
Are you involved with the Clarksburg Festa coming up, the Festival?
Yes, actually. So the Portuguese Historical and Culture Society is co-sponsoring with the IDS organizers, and I am somewhat involved in that event right now. Yes, and that's being advertised mainstream actually as well.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting event. So they took, those of you who haven't seen that online, they took the word festa and festival, and they put festival, which is being creative. It's being creative with something different to bring out some of the third, fourth, and fifth generation. That's so kudos for that event as well. Daniel, your thoughts? I know that you, of course, can speak Portuguese, but your kids may be a different situation, although you've tried to teach them, I know. But what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see? And especially like as you mentioned, you're in Fresno, you're in Kerman. Kerman does have a Portuguese hall and has a Portuguese festa. It's not as large as it once was, but it still has a festa. So what are your thoughts of being in an area? And again, Fresno doesn't have, well, CPDS we do have a hall, CPDS, but it's not a big conglomerate of Portuguese people. Although the interesting thing is that Fresno has as many Portuguese people, more actually, according to the census, in Tulare County. So there are 11,000 Portuguese people in Fresno County and only 10,000 in Tulare County. The difference is that the Fresno community is more second, third, and fourth generation, where the Tulare community is more first and second generation. I mean, there's third and fourth, but there's been more immigrants to Tulare County in the last 50 years than there has been to Fresno County. But your thoughts on it?
Right, and I would imagine that the Tulare County numbers on a per capita basis are much higher in Tulare County than Fresno. But because Fresno at 600,000 is a big city, there's naturally going to be a large number of everything. So a couple of things. Well, I guess I could start with the language thing, and I've talked to Denise many times about this at various times. So this may sound familiar to Denise, but as far as language instruction, I'm a bit more partial towards what Denise was saying about maybe making some of these events including more English, right? Because I don't know. I know this may sound sacrilegious. That's not the right term, but very bad. But I don't really buy into the argument that language and culture are, tied at the hip, right? You could be Portuguese American and be just as proudly Portuguese American and not speak Portuguese, right? And it does help definitely, without a doubt, to speak Portuguese, and it connects you more, and you maybe feel something more inside you perhaps. But I understand the reality of living in America or in a foreign country, and you being of an ethnic background, and not speaking that language of your ethnic background. And there are social forces that are very difficult to overcome. You have to work very hard to overcome those forces if you want to, for example, speak that language that your ancestors spoke, right? In our case, Portuguese. So, I'm all for Portuguese instruction, of course, and you don't have to tell me twice about that. My whole family is involved in it. I'm involved in it. So, but as far as language instruction, um, it takes raising a child bilingually. Obviously, the dominant language will always be English here in America, or Spanish in Mexico, Portuguese in Portugal, and so on and so forth. But for the second language uh, here in our situation, it'd be Portuguese. Obviously, it takes a massive amount of input, and I don't think people realize how much input is needed. Linguistic input is needed for a typically developing child to acquire Portuguese to the point that he or she could use that language functionally. You're looking at around, at the very minimum, estimates are like 25% of daily linguistic input being in that second language. And most linguists find that be, less than 25% is, the child doesn't really develop it to the point that he or she could use it functionally. And when you think about it, really sit down and think about how much linguistic input you get. And I'm not talking about just speaking to somebody and listening to somebody speak directly, but listening to the radio lyrics, for example, reading what you read online, watching TV, everything around you is English, naturally. And so 25% of that being Portuguese, that's a large amount. It's not impossible, definitely, but it's a massive amount. That doesn't mean we give up, of course. There's many other ways. So um, one thing that has helped me, and I use these programs every once in a while whenever I need some help or have some questions. But even with my two boys, online tutors. So if you think about the linguistic talent, the human capital, more specifically linguistic talent that's trapped in other countries around the world, right? English here in America, or Portuguese in Portugal or Brazil. They have something that you need, that you want. They have Portuguese, and maybe, and you could either pay them for that, right? By using a program like italki, right? That connects you to these speakers around the world, and you pay, and they tutor you for an hour, and at reasonable cost, anywhere from $7 an hour to, I'm sure, up to $30 an hour, right? And you can find speakers from everywhere around the world, all languages. Or if you want to do an exchange, like you speak English, you teach English, help English, tutor of English, or just have a conversation, and they speak their language, you could use Tandem. That's a good program as well, and that's free, right? Naturally, because you guys are trading off, right? And so this is much more helpful because it's, again, pure linguistic inputs from a native speaker. And especially with italki, it's more reliable because you're paying and you have a specific time, and so on and so forth. And it's been very, very helpful. And even with my two young boys, they could understand Portuguese pretty well, right? And the oldest one could speak at a basic level, but they've done very, very well with these online tutors. But it's a lot of input that's needed. And oftentimes with these smaller community schools, they're a great start, but at 1 hour a day, half of that 1 hour being Portuguese and half of it being English, right? You could imagine that's very, very little input. It's great. It's a great start. And they teach other things too, like culture. They put you in contact with other Portuguese people that perhaps you didn't know, other Portuguese kids, and so on and so forth. So that's definitely worth it as well. But that's not enough. Waiting until we get to high school to take the 2 obligatory years that we take for a foreign language, again, that's better than nothing, but that's the start. And like I've talked to Denise many times before, starting early in elementary school with these dual immersion programs, which are a form of bilingual programs, are the most effective. But we need a critical mass of Portuguese speakers. They work here for Spanish, and where I live for Hmong as well, because there's a massive amount of native Spanish speakers and Hmong speakers, right? Portuguese, no, unfortunately. Another two is, again, this is my privilege speaking, but traveling to Portugal. We go every summer, we take the kids, and we, among other things, we say, well, if you want that ice cream, you're gonna have to order it yourself. You know, if you want this, if you want that, you know, and you encourage them, and they do well, especially towards the end of the trip, they get more comfortable and confident. But that's something I know that is not feasible for many people. But reading as well, and I was listening to Angela speak the other day with you, Denise. Bilingual books are very helpful. If you know how to read Portuguese, especially you know, Portuguese books, children's books, right? If you speak Portuguese at a basic level, you could probably get through a child's book in Portuguese, right? But I remember Angela saying initially she had some trouble, right? So she got some bilingual books and has created many amazing bilingual books. So that's a start as well, right? Introducing them to the language and so on and so forth. But don't beat yourself up as a parent if it's not paying dividends, because it's very difficult, very difficult. And when you see it happening with other kids, like Hispanics, children here in America, especially where I live, there's a massive amount of Spanish. So they could spend their entire day just in Spanish, right? And so you have to come, and you know, they could go to the grocery store, they could go to the, you know, anywhere. You know, I got an email this morning from a mom of a student, and the entire email was in Spanish, and I am able to respond, but she knows that there is that Spanish help, right? Or else she wouldn't have sent that email in Spanish. But that's not the case for Portuguese at all. And that's fine. So we're at a disadvantage in that situation. That definitely makes it more difficult. So there is help, and even if the child does not acquire proficiency or is able to speak it, right? You do plant that seed, and hopefully that seed, you know, maybe my mom and dad did that when I was younger and I was resistant, but as I got older, my mom and dad didn't push me when I was in high school and in college. But I was like, this is awesome. I want to take what I know, this little seed, and just, you know, let it germinate and become and learn more. And I have. And also too, another quick technique that helps too is, well, you know, I don't know if you've heard of Netflix, but there's a lot of awesome content. There's, you know, if you go to the Portuguese, if you go to the child section profile, if you click on the child profile, and you go to subtitles and you could change the language, they have both Brazilian for most shows on the kids profile. They have Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese. For the adult profiles, it's almost always, if Portuguese is available, just in Brazilian Portuguese. But I've noticed with our two boys, if they want to watch any TV on Netflix, they have to switch it over to Portuguese, and they'll go back and forth between Brazilian Portuguese, European Portuguese. It doesn't matter. But on the kids profile, there's a lot of options too. So that's definitely helpful for parents as well.
Some good thoughts indeed, and some interesting takes on it. Before I turn to Brad, I think that's, you know, we have to have also an ongoing conversation about the language teaching throughout the entire state of California. And I have a pet peeve, which I share with all of you because I've shared it often. You know, I have a language class right now at Fresno State, and before Professor Inês Lima also had a language class, and both of looking at some of the students that she had and some of the students I have had in the last few years. And for example, this year I have 20. The class is full, 26. I have only 11 who are Portuguese background. The other 15 are Hispanic. they have nothing to do. It's not like they're half Hispanic, half Portuguese. But there's one that's half Hispanic, half Portuguese. But the rest of them are not. And I mean, and both, JD and Justin know that there's a bit more than 12 Portuguese kids at Fresno State who don't know Portuguese. Okay, there's a bit more than that. If we did a survey, there's probably about 300 Portuguese kids of Portuguese background at Fresno State. So I think that there has to be kind of a little bit of a pride in learning the language, even if you're just going to learn how to say good morning and good afternoon and good night, and I'll see you next time. But you're going to learn that, Portugal did this, and, a little bit of culture. There has to be a bit of pride, and but the other token, which I completely understand, the other side of the coin is that, students are there to complete a degree, and you don't have a lot of options as you had in years past. And sometimes you can't fit in a class. That is understandable as well. But between community colleges and between and even in high school, the conversation we had Thursday night with Mr. Fagundes, who teaches high school at Mission Oak High School, that the two Tulare young men know, he told me the same thing. 64% of his students are Hispanic. 64%. If it was not for the 64% Hispanic students who are taking Portuguese, he would have to teach at least 2 or 3 different subjects. He couldn't just do that. So as far as promoting the language, we sometimes need to look at the other side of the coin, which is how do we get Spanish? And that was a big part of our conversation, which we're not going to have here. But how do we get these kids who are fluent in Spanish because they came from Mexico or they're spoken Spanish all their lives to be enticed to be trilingual? Because we're going to fill the classrooms with Hispanics. And if we fill the classrooms with Hispanics, that will offer the 1 or 2 Portuguese in that area the possibility of taking Portuguese. So if we flip this around, let's teach Portuguese at Sacramento State and all of the 23 campuses of the CSU systems, because we want to have the opportunity for Spanish speakers to become trilingual, then that gives the opportunity to Portuguese kids who are there to also take Portuguese, because no one is going to open up a class for only 6 or 7 students. But Brad, your thoughts on promoting the culture, as we mentioned, and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on that.
Well, I think my first answer is triggered by something that Daniel said about it's still possible to celebrate the Portuguese culture even without the language. And so you won't be surprised to hear that in San Francisco, there are a lot of people with Italian heritage. They have the Italian Heritage Day, which I guess used to be called Columbus Day, but they have a parade and everything. And there are so many people, of course, a lot of Italian restaurants, so many people in San Francisco of Italian American, Italian heritage who don't speak Italian. But they sure celebrate. And so it is possible. And I feel like that probably we are at a point where, someone who's Portuguese American like me, I actually studied Brazilian Portuguese in college. And I came home and I talked to my dad, and he turned his nose up and said, that's Brazilian. Right. And so there's a certain amount of, snobbery sometimes. That makes it hard.
And we wouldn't be the 5th most spoken language in the world if it wasn't for the Brazilian.
But
Portugal would be like the 95th language spoken in the world.
So we can't do everything in Portuguese, but we can still celebrate it and learn about it and have the traditions. And then I think if we take the Italian American model, mainstreaming this culture that we're proud of. And so we went to a few weeks ago, there was at the SF Jazz Center in San Francisco, is it Carmine, one of the Fado singers came. And I could tell he doesn't really speak any English. And so he was singing the Portuguese songs, and most of the crowd was Portuguese and I think knew him. But, that's a mainstream San Francisco venue. And it's a place where people could come and celebrate who aren't even familiar with the culture, the same way that we celebrate Italian American culture by going out to the restaurants or going to the parade. It's a thing. And making it attractive to people even outside the culture, I think has potential. And I think I was sitting next to someone who was an American guy. It was a couple we brought along, and his wife's had been a Festa Queen, so she's speaks a little, but the husband totally not. And here I am trying to tell him a couple of words that I understand. I think it's always hard to understand when people are singing, even if it's in English, but because you want to make it more interesting for someone. And I found myself unable to do it because it's really hard. And he sang a lot of songs I didn't know. But why not help people with taking advantage of technology and having subtitles or super titles the way they do with the opera, and you can have some translation or have a little booklet that gives the message of each song. And you know, they do it at Umakaza when they do a Father's Night. David Garcia and you know, they'll give a little story about the song first. Angela Brito, they do a nice job of presenting. And so I think there's an opportunity for more mainstreaming to have introductions and translations to a broader audience. I like the idea of Netflix. I you know, there's a lot of content that is Portuguese. You know, Portuguese people in Portugal don't dance, they don't dress up in white shirts and red vests and little hats and do a Vita all the time, right? They're normal people, and they're making TV shows and they're living their lives, and they're modern too. And so I think it's okay for us to, you know, we can have a TV watching or a watch party of a Portuguese show, or, you know, soccer, and there's other things than just the festas, and I think we can think more broadly.
Indeed. And by the way, I had an event where I asked, we had 4 exchange students, excuse me, from Portugal here that actually Justin and JD knew. Justin just did by the way, a 1-month internship in the Azores last June. And they were telling me that they were talking to some people in the Portuguese community when they went up north. They went to Sacramento area, and most of the people that watched there was a famous, well, I mean famous, widely seen series. I don't know if all of you have heard Turn the Tide or Rabo de Peixe in Portuguese, about that had a lot of controversy around it. But anyway, but it was all in Portuguese. And 2 of the young people that were here from the Azores told me that, you know, the 4 or 5 people they talked to that watched it, that knew Portuguese, or, you know, so they watched it in English. So, you know, it would have been better, a challenge, as Danielle said, to maybe put it in Portuguese and watch it, because it was with subtitles in English. I mean, the original had Portuguese with English subtitles. And nowadays, I think it's a group, and it became #1 worldwide, in the top 10, I should say. It was top 10 worldwide. It was not only top 10 was in the United States, but all of over other countries. It was in the top 10 for a while, and people were watching it obviously in English with Portuguese subtitles. I mean, Portuguese with English subtitles, or they changed the language, either or. But there is a lot of content on Daniel's right. There's a lot of content on Netflix. And by the way, one of the young men that came to this internship, which both of you remember, Francisco, he was probably the one that spoke the best English, and he spoke very well. And I asked him how he learned it, and he said Netflix and American songs. He said music and Netflix. That's how I learned English. You know, I mean, he had English in school, he had the formal, but again, it was that basic way. And then the opportunity, as Daniel said, see, in the Azores, everybody of a certain generation, everybody under 30, and the same in mainland Portugal, most people in the cities under 30 can speak English, and sometimes they even go to speak English amongst themselves to practice the language. And there's, you know, all of the tourists and everything else. So there's a different opportunity. But I think there are a lot of opportunities. I want to promise you I would end by noon. I know all you have to go. And so my last question is going to be, I think this is an enlightening discussion, lots of different opportunities, lots of different possibilities. Let's save the language where it can be saved, but let's not lose the 2nd or 3rd generation when it cannot be saved. That's my thing. You know, sometimes we have to kind of pick our battles. I mean, you know, it's easier in Tulare because folks have an opportunity. You know, if a Portuguese kid wants to learn Portuguese, if his parents want him to learn Portuguese, if he doesn't learn it, it's because they didn't make the effort, because there are venues to learn the language. But when you live, for example, in Lemoore, that's a bit different situation. And Lemoore is 45 minutes from Tulare. So, you know, it's a different situation. And now our issue, as all of you know, is California. According to the new census, our numbers increased, actually, of Portuguese. It's not people coming from Portugal. It's people like Carol, people of 3rd and 4th generation that used to put themselves just as white, or European. And now they're proud of, being even a quarter Portuguese. So they put Portuguese on there. That's how we grew, because we didn't have 20,000 people come from the Azores. Or from mainland Portugal, or from anywhere in the Portuguese speaking country. And these are not Brazilian people, obviously. These are people identify as being Portuguese ethnic group. But the numbers grew, but the numbers grew in different cities. So in other words, there are Portuguese in 502 cities in California. So there are cities in California that didn't have any Portuguese that all of a sudden have 200, but that's not enough to put a Portuguese class together or anything like that, unfortunately. Anyway, my last question is around this. So how can technology play a role in this? And Daniel touched upon that as far as the language is, but even the culture. How can technology play a role in bringing us together, since we're so far dispersed, and in promoting some cultural aspects of our culture? And just so I don't start with the same people all the time, I'll start with the lady this time. So Carol, what are your thoughts on technology? I mean, everybody is sick of Zoom, but what are your thoughts of technology playing a role in this geographical? And you have mapped out, by the way, I don't know if all of you know, but Carol has a wonderful dissertation that we'd love to have her. I know she has lack of time, but hopefully she'll work on it. We'd love to publish it, not the dissertation itself, but aspects of it, as we've talked, because she has mapped out in her PhD every single Portuguese hall, street names, parks, and things like that. It's dated, it's a few years ago, things have changed, but it's a wonderful resource for our community. I mean, when I read it, what was it, 10 years ago, maybe? You'll correct me if I'm wrong. I found places I didn't even know that had Portuguese street names. And so it's a testament to our presence in all over California. Carol, technology, how can it work?
Well, based on what happened in the pandemic, I mean, I like Zoom. I find Zoom very, very useful. I mean, doing my dissertation, that was 20 years ago now, actually. Technology wasn't as advanced as it is now. And my mom and we traveled everywhere in California to take pictures of the halls and do the inventory that I did for my dissertation. And it's long. California is a big state and it's very far. So, I mean, I think technology would be advantageous in the Portuguese community, and to use more so that we can connect in all these different places that we're located in. Like now with this conference, I mean, there's no way I could participate if I didn't have Zoom. So, so again, I think technology, can help us grow as a community and connect more geographically and with everybody. We just kind of need to work it more, using it as a tool, advertising it more in our community with our events possibly. I do want to also note too that again, because California is such a big state and there's so many different communities in California that have Portuguese festas and Portuguese events, and I agree with what Brad says on every level with Portuguese culture and heritage being more mainstream. The community needs to work at that more. If there could just be a place, a central place in California where somebody that's of my background, like being fourth generation, who didn't know much about Portuguese culture, if there's a place they can go, I mean, like a museum or a library or something where they could learn more about Portuguese heritage and culture, just some central place, central location. I know in Fresno State, you're working on the library there and so forth, and trying to create more of a presence of Portuguese, a center for Portuguese, for people to go for Portuguese heritage and culture. But I just think that needs to be evaluated more too. If we're going to become more mainstream, what place can somebody go to learn more about Portuguese history and culture? Be a library, a museum, something like that. I know in San Jose we do have the Portuguese Historical Museum, and they do have exhibits there as well. But that is a small museum, and it's it's tied in with the city of San Jose. So it kind of get buried and lost, with people just trying to find more about Portuguese history and culture, especially of their background.
Well, first of all, Carol, I was trying to make you and I younger. I thought it was only 10 years ago. But second of all, that's a great idea. Why not a online museum? Why not an online museum? And hey, maybe our Fresno State Library wants to take a challenge that. I mean, Brad.
Yeah, I think I would like to see someone take on having a go-to website, whether it's with Luso or Fresno State, somebody in media who makes a list of content that's exciting. And so just like you go to Netflix and look for something to watch on Friday night, you can go to this, there's a go-to site and find some exciting content. Like the show you mentioned, or the Portuguese language movies for kids. I think people need some curated content, and there's so much out there. So that would be my push.
Indeed, we can do it at Fresno State as long as we have Luso and PFSA pay for it. So maybe we'll
right. It'd take paying somebody who's a media person to put it out there, but
we can do it as long as we have. We've been very, and we haven't even promoted, but we started something called it's our newsletter that we were doing digitally, Novidades newsletter. Now it's a blog, and we just take one news from Portugal every day, just one news item, and put it in English. And organically it grew to 15,000 views, because people want to know something about Portugal. So every day we'll put something on, a news story about the Portuguese. But I think we need to do something about the heritage. So it's simple to do with the blog, because it doesn't cost tons of money. It just has to be curated, as you said. It has to be factual, of course, and just where people can learn about from everything from fado to the bullfights in Terceira, to the to the rap music now very popular in Portugal, things like that. So yeah, indeed, that is just something that we have to work on. I like the idea. The dynamic duo, Batman and Robin.
I'd probably say, just coming from a younger perspective, some people are actually doing it and they're getting a little stronger, but if we could keep doing it as a social media in general, there's even, this is this guy on the East Coast, How to Cook Stuff. I forget his real name, but he just cooks all these Portuguese cuisines, and he's just has like an interactive type personality, and he just shows the culture through the food. And then there's also like the Portuguese kids have been doing it for a while, just having little clips, like funny clips of just like Portuguese humor and things like that. That's kind of funny. And then there's also even these folklore groups. They have these really cool videos of like what they're doing and when they're performing and things like that. If we could just contribute that to possibly just small clips of like what's going on in Portugal, plus what's going on here culturally for the Portuguese, that's something that can really have these younger generations want to be more involved, because they see all these interesting stuff on social media. I mean, social media is there for anyone to use, and if we can capitalize on that, I'd probably say that's a very beneficial thing for the culture.
Agree with you. A lot of good stuff being done, and it's just what Brad said. We just maybe need to bring it all together to one group, because a lot of times people just, you found, this guy, but maybe somebody else hasn't found. I've seen him too, and he's good. But it's just, it takes a lot of work to go find everything. If we could have, if he would agree to, like just a link, from a central size that then could go to the Portuguese kids, to the cooking, to the, things that are being done. I think a central hub is an important thing, because people, including especially your generation, you guys have also, you spend a lot on time on social media, but you don't have all the time in the world, because you're working and you have your educational studies as well. But there is a lot of good stuff out there, as Justin said. The problem is, how do you connect it all together? JD.
I think final thought too is it's gonna be a little bit more simple, but just simply having little things like Zoom and Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, like little things like this, and being able to connect with, if let's say family members you have back in the old country. I think that's a very small, but it can do a lot of big things too. If you keep in touch with them, you can see what's going on back home, how the family is doing, and you just keep up with stuff there. If you disconnect from where your roots come from, I think it's something that we can't afford to happen in the near future. I think keeping in touch with it is a major thing that we need to I guess drill into the minds of people our age, even, and the younger generation as well, and even sometimes maybe the older generation. I know a lot of people back home that they've lost their connections there and they don't go back anymore. But like, for Justin, he just went on an internship a couple months ago, and then I was just there in February for Carnival. So being able to keep in touch with that, it keeps that spark like lit in your heart to keep these things going and to have the passion for your culture and your heritage. So that's my take on that.
That's a good point, and that's actually a good. We have been trying. We haven't been successful, but hopefully we can, with the past students that have done internships, have like a 2 or 3 times a year meeting on Zoom, where students here can just find out about what life is at the University of Aveiro or the Azores or Faro or one of the universities in Lisbon. Zoom can open up a lot of opportunities, including connecting with your roots, because I'm of the generation we had to wait, a month and a half for a letter to arrive. We didn't even have phone calls, okay? Because we had phones, but it was people in the Azores didn't have phones, and then when they got phones in the 70s, it was expensive as hell to make a phone call. So now these things are available to everyone. Good idea. Both good ideas. All good ideas. And Mr. Mello, what are your thoughts? Technology. Of course, you just gave us 3 great tools there on chat.
Yeah, I did. So if you want to check them out, I think the last one, Language Reactor, is an add-on to for YouTube videos and Netflix. So if you're watching Netflix on your computer, it's an add-on, and it allows you to have both Portuguese or whatever the target language, and then your language, the subtitles like English, Portuguese, and so on and so forth. So very, very helpful, and that's something that I use to help me out. But yes, I like I said before, my God, I remember trying to expand my Portuguese before all this technology, and it was very, very difficult. And I'm talking about like maybe the early 2000s, right? Late 1990s, early 2000s, and it was not. And so it's so much easier, incredibly easier, now to do that. But if you have an immigration stream that's drying up, and you can't just walk out of the house and talk to a Portuguese speaker, then you have to find other ways, and technology is a great way. And I told you about all the other ways before, but personally, you get discouraged a lot when you hit a roadblock when it comes to learning, say, Portuguese or expanding your Portuguese, right? So I remember, so don't get beat up, don't beat yourself up over it. Just some personal advice. So I remember, this many years ago, but when I was younger, Portuguese I would speak would be very rudimentary and basic. That's fine. It worked for the house, and that was it. But I always wanted more. I always wanted to learn more. So I had to learn the subjunctive. And so I struggled. Nobody was able to help me, around me. But I knew it was something that Portuguese speakers and Spanish speakers, native Portuguese and Spanish speakers used all the time. And I wanted to learn it. And so I hit a roadblock, and it was kind of discouraging. Like, how did I, And then, I found somebody that was able to help me, and, you get over it and you keep going. And oftentimes what happens is, you get to this point and then you're like, no, but I want to get to this point. And then you get to that point and you're like, no, I want to get to this point. But then when you look back on it, look back on your success, however small it is, and, pat yourself on the back. So don't get too discouraged. Right. And another thing too is I don't know if this is quite technology, but well, I guess in a way it is. There is a lot of content, a lot of literature online, and if you are going to Portugal, if you're lucky to travel to a Portuguese-speaking country, any country, or if you know people who are going, like, hey, my mom and dad are going this summer, you could tell them to bring back books for you. That's very, very helpful. And actually, as a little plug here, we have probably 100 or so children's books in Portuguese that we're willing to give away for anybody who
There's no
wants
state
them. My
library.
boys are now. my boys are now 8 and 10 years old, and so the books that they read, like Minecraft books, they'll do it in Portuguese, or we'll do it together. But o Patinho Feio, for example, that's way beneath them now. They're much older. So I have all these books, first grade, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3, these basic books that my kids have outgrown. And so if there's anybody out there, who has young kids or just would like these books, I don't want to throw them away. I don't have any family members or friends who want them. And they mean a lot to me. And I would really love to see them go to, a family, to parents, to kids, who really could use them. And of course, I'll just give them away. Just contact me or contact Denise, and Denise, you could contact me. But yeah, there's so much opportunity, and I work with technology a lot with learning Portuguese, not necessarily Portuguese, but mainly Spanish, because I have to, 90%, 95% of my students are Hispanic, and about 50% of those parents speak only Spanish. So that when I call home, literally about 50 to 60% of my phone calls are in Spanish, which is fine. But it's getting to a point that I felt limited with my Spanish before, trying to communicate what I needed to about the student that, I'm trying to expand my Spanish to better, so I'm going through the process. I know what it's like. I have a lot of tools and so on and so forth. I feel that I could help other people out. So if anybody has any questions, or is interested in anything I said, just send me an email or talk to Denise, and Denise could put you in contact with me, and I'd be more than happy to help you out and talk about any of the things that I've talked about before. So, but again, thank you, Denise, for this panel.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you all. I think that we have some good ideas I jotted down here. I think that indeed what Brad also mentioned, one of the lack is mainstreaming. I think everybody mentioned the same thing as well, mainstreaming the culture. And for example, we have a lack of Portuguese restaurants, and part of it is because people think, well, why am I going to start a Portuguese restaurant in Fresno? There's no Portuguese people. Well, there's not that many Italians either, and there's like 100 Italian restaurants in the Fresno area. People eat other people's foods. We all eat Mexican food, and so sometimes it's just don't look at just the Portuguese demographics, but our culture. Our food is such an important part of culture. Young people love food, and they love trying different foods, and if we would be doing ourselves a service as a community statewide if instead of just 3 or 4 Portuguese restaurants we have, or a couple of bakeries that also do some lunches and once in a while, like the Portuguese bakery, and they do a fine job. But if we would have 100 Portuguese restaurants in California, everybody would know about Portuguese food. And like everybody knows about Mexican food and Italian food and even Greek food and Mediterranean food and Armenian food in Fresno, people know it. So we need to mainstream this. I mean, it's just, it's great to go to a festa and try Portuguese food. It's great to go to a festival now in Pismo or Clarksburg and try some Portuguese food when the festas are not going on, like late October, November. But it would be great to just go to a Portuguese restaurant, on every Thursday night or Friday or Monday for lunch. So indeed, I think the key is mainstreaming. It is important. So thank you all. Any other additions, please let me know. Any other thoughts, send me an email. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, JD. Thank you, Danielle, Carol, and Brad. Appreciate it. It's an entire intergenerational panel, different generations, different thoughts, but all very important for this conversation. On behalf of Luso, American Education Foundation, and PBBI, thanks you all very much. And thanks to all of you at home as well. Thank you. Take care, everyone.